back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys! So I am here today to do some book reviews for you, and I have two books that I'm going to review. They are both green, so that's why I put them in this video together. That's all the logic I needed. I'm going to start off with this one. It is The Essex Serpent and it's by Sarah Perry. I picked this book up quite a long time ago. It's a beautiful cover and I'd heard really good things from a lot of the people I know who read more literary fiction than I do, including Mercedes, so I wanted to give it a try, although I was unsure if it would be my sort of thing. I read this as part of the Book Buddy-a-thon. I didn't love it. I ended up giving it a 3 stars, so it wasn't a bad rating, but it definitely had some really difficult bits for me. Not in terms of hard to read, but in terms of trying to connect with the story. I find personally I really like to connect with the characters, to get into the story, to feel like I can empathise with them and sympathise and be part of their plotline. And I felt that that was kind of not very easy for me in this book. It felt like a lot of the characters were slightly detached from me and I just couldn't find one to really cling on to and get into and enjoy as much as I hoped. However, this is a short book. I say short, relatively speaking, because I read a lot of epic fantasy, which is very long. So it's a kind of average size book, and it tries to cover a lot of different themes in an average size book, which is both good because it means that this author is certainly trying to show off all her skills and show off all the different elements of what she wants to portray. That's great. But it also meant that I struggled a little bit to feel like any of those things were really developed and really explored to the extent that I wanted them to be. I feel like if you already knew about the subjects that she was covering, like suffragettes and gender roles and widows in this time period, then maybe you would have not found it as difficult as I do. But I don't really know too much about that time period of history. It's not something that hugely interests me, if I'm honest. And so I definitely didn't feel like I knew enough to just go off on my own and feel like I understood it. I felt as though I wanted a bit more explanation and a bit more kind of help with the story. So I didn't quite get that, and that's a large part of why this only got 3 stars. This book follows lots of different characters, but I would say one of the main characters is Cora Seaborn, who is a young woman married to her husband until he dies quite early on in the book from an illness, and she is left abandoned as a widower with a young son who is called Francis. Francis is quite an unusual child. He kind of loves to collect things. He's a bit of a collector. He goes around and pickpockets occasionally and gathers small trinkets and objects that he really likes the look of. So it could be things like blue buttons or strange things that he finds on a beach, or just peculiar items, I guess, he picks up and he collects. He's certainly got a very ingenious mind. He's certainly a character who is not necessarily your normal child. So she struggles to really connect with her son on a way that most mothers and children do. But Cora has a scientific side to her. She loves the study of fossils, and she decides after her husband is dead to go and move to the countryside, or Essex, to hopefully explore her passion, hopefully grieve and get over her husband's death, and start a new life for herself outside of London, which is where she's always been. So she does this, she moves to Essex, and she quite quickly meets a lot of the people who are living there and finds out about the legend of the Essex Serpent, which is supposedly this strange great beast that can twist minds and steal people and has very terrible powers or something like that. So she's immediately interested as the natural scientist that she is and tries to find out more. However, although it is the title of the book, it's not a huge theme in the story. It's always there as a background theme, but I think the real theme in this book, or at least one of the major themes in this book, is about Cora and how she survives being looked down upon for being a widow, being looked down upon for being a single parent, and being kind of relegated to the backgrounds of society in London, but allowed to express herself and be free in the outskirts of Essex. So It's quite a different lifestyle from what she's always known. She feels a lot happier there, but it's also very tricky for her to initially settle in and really feel at home until she meets another family where she starts to connect with the husband and the children and finds out that potentially there is something really loving there and she could easily fit into their home life and their surroundings and be a part of the Essex community. So that's one storyline. The other storyline is the inventor and doctor who is kind of infatuated with Cora from the start. He was the one who was treating her husband, and during that time she got to know him and he found that he was totally besotted with her, but she does not feel the same, and so it's kind of a rocky relationship. He is definitely way more into her than she is into him, and that makes for some tricky situations. We also have his friend who is also part of the storyline and comes in at various points, and we have Martha, who is Cora's best friend and someone who is much more heavily involved in women's suffrage and rights, and definitely someone who is a bit more political than Cora herself is. So there's lots of different threads being pulled in this book, and I think for me that was kind of the problem. It was definitely enchanting, and there were moments where I thought that it was beautifully written and the themes that she was trying to get at were being handled really well. I just wanted more, and I just wanted it to be a bit more strung out and a bit more developed in all of the plot lines so that I could really start to imagine and connect with the characters on a deeper level than I currently was. It wasn't a bad book, but it definitely had flaws for me, and it made me really conflicted. For days I was thinking about this and trying to decide whether I would give it a 2, a 3 or a 4, and I ended up settling on a 3 just because it's so divisive for me. I know that Eleanor and I think Janet read this together and DNF'd it, and then Mercedes absolutely loved it, so there's real different ends of the spectrum, and I guess it depends whose reading taste you're more similar to, what you're gonna think of it. But for me it was just a middle of the road, very likeable, very thought-provoking, but also really annoying book at times, and I certainly had my issues with it, but certainly found it really fascinating too. Plus it's gorgeous, so that always helps. I gave this a 3 stars in the end. I would love to hear your thoughts because it's tricky. It's a strange and trippy little book. The other book that I recently read is The Sons of Thestian. This is book 1 in the Harmatia cycle, and it's by M.E. Vaughan, and she sent this to me for review, and I believe it's a self-published book. It is the first one in a fantasy series, a YA fantasy, and I really enjoyed this. It started off kind of slow and a bit predictable, like most fantasy books, but it definitely took on its own shape later into the story, and I actually found myself really enjoying it towards the end, and the end is good, trust me, the end is good. This follows a young prince who is growing up in a kingdom under a father who definitely loves him but is besotted with an evil queen who is ruling tyrannically over the people. The queen is definitely taking over and getting her clutches into everything. So the prince, Jonathan, is constantly on his guard. He's constantly getting horrible dreams about things going wrong, and he decides he just has to escape this place. He cannot stay here any longer. He needs to get away and hopefully go on his own adventure that will separate him from the drama that is going on around him and possibly help him to find his own destiny. So he does this, and he goes on this adventure and he runs away from the palace, and we follow him and his friend from childhood who is called Rufus Merle. He is a magician who has been working in close contact with the crown since he was young, but he and Jonathan kind of fell out of friendship when their different duties kind of drew them apart. So it's quite rare for them to get much time together, and when he goes on this quest to bring Jonathan back to the palace for the king and queen, he realises that Jonathan is really hurting inside and definitely does need to go on this journey to get away from everything, to hopefully find things out about himself. And so Rufus Merle decides he will accompany Jonathan, and they end up meeting some fae. They end up coming across this kind of weird cult-like thing going on in the forest, and it all leads to a bit of an adventure, which is definitely fun. I really enjoyed the direction this book took from the halfway point onwards. I think up until the halfway point it's a bit predictable. There are some elements that I would have liked to see kind of take a different direction or be less similar to other things I've read. But from the halfway point onwards, when the characters are kind of established, the world is set up, and we are happy to go on our way, it starts to get very cool. And I really enjoyed the second half, particularly the ending, when things just took on a very dramatic turn and our characters were really pushed to the limits to discover more about themselves, to find out about the world they were in and the magic and the people that they were surrounded by, and I definitely liked it a lot. So I would say that this is a book that is definitely a solid beginning, much stronger in the second half, but certainly made me want to read book 2. And luckily I do already have book 2, which is this one, Blood of the Delphi. And again, it's a very beautiful cover. So I'm really looking forward to going on to this one now that I've finished the first, because the first one, I was left with definite questions at the end, definite things I wanted to see resolved, and hopefully in this book that will happen. I'm really looking forward to this, and I definitely think this is the start of a potentially very strong series. So I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, a really likeable story if you can get through the first section, which is a little predictable, and definitely something that is shaping up to become a really fun adventure crossed with fantasy. I really enjoyed it, and I would love to hear if you guys have read it or if you're planning to pick it up. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know which of these appeals most to you, or if you have read either of them already, and I will see you all very soon in my next video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.